Hello, thanks for joining me again. I hope again. My name is Mark Deuze. I'm a professor of media studies at the University of Amsterdam, and today I'm really happy to be able to connect with Jakub Gornicki. Is a journalist from Poland, from Warsaw. One of the founders of the Outriders network, a network of journalists operating all over, especially Eastern Europe. Jakub has been reporting in and out of Ukraine since late February, trying to produce a series of podcasts, setting up a series of hubs around the country of Ukraine to support local journalists doing their journalism, telling the story of what's happening there. Outriders has been doing this in many parts of the world. They've been reporting in and out of Syria, out of Afghanistan, of course, Poland, and other countries, being recognized and awarded for their work at various instances. For example, at the International Journalism Festival in Perugia. Please, I hope you find the conversation we had recorded on a early Sunday morning, Jakub calling in from Kyiv in Ukraine, informative, inspiring as I find it, to always keep in touch with Jakub and follow the work of Outriders and find ways to support him, the network, and of course, journalism and journalists in Ukraine. Let's just start and see where we end up. And like with these kind of conversations, and in this situation, of course, I just want to know how you're doing, and maybe while you're talking about that, to the extent that you feel comfortable with that, maybe also tell us something about how these last 6 weeks, or this time that you've been covering what's going on in Ukraine, how that's been for you. Because, you've been largely based in Kyiv, but you've been other parts of the country. You've been a little bit able to go back home to Warsaw, but you've also been to Hungary to cover the elections there. So, and just the idea that you're driving around while all of this is going on and trying to make it work, to me is already overwhelming, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that works and how that feels.
Yeah, so I left home on February 19th after more or less, 2 years of pandemic, as we all have had. I went to Ukraine knowing that the war might start at any time. Although back then, the most likely scenario was that the war and the invasion will begin in the east, and the war, which lasts for 8 years, will actually be escalated to a bigger level. So when it began on 24th, it has been a shock, first of all, to Ukrainians, and second of all, to all the media who were here on the ground and who were preparing for a much different scenario. So it's almost 2 months for me, frankly, being on the road. I'm doing okay. This is why right now I'm doing okay in terms of I've managed to get accustomed to this life, but it's also, frankly speaking, the life which we always wanted when we were starting Outriders. Although by saying this, I have to say that it's not like we really want to just, cover tragedy, murders, rape, and so on. It's more that our organization simply covers issues and stories which do not happen physically in one place or in our country. We travel to many different places to create different stories. So just this mere being on the road is okay. On the other thing, if you tell me that after 2 years of pandemic, there's going to be a huge war in Europe, I would be saying no way. But it seems that for 2.5 years we are in a phase which could be just called hold my beer. So I'm a little bit afraid what's coming after this war or next to this war, because I do slightly remember that there is the pandemic, but where I am, or for me, it really doesn't make any more it's not an issue right now. Simply there are bigger things happening, there are bigger things to cover, and so on and so on. So that's basically, I think, where I am. I've had different phases throughout that almost 2 months, frankly speaking. I think next week is going to be 2 months.
Yeah.
Based on the situation we have found ourselves following the different stories we were working on. And for me personally, this was the first time being so close to war. Not for my organization. Different reporters from Outriders have been in even tougher situation than I have found myself. But it has been challenging.
Mm.
It has been, I know that maybe for non-journalists watching this may sound strange, but I have to say it's a very good experience to have, I think, in the end as a journalist, to understand, first of all, yourself. Are you able to cover those stories? And second of all, if you are able, what can you do? What kind of stories can you make? How do you talk to people who are in such a fragile, emotional, bad shape, after their friends, families get killed or tortured or so, and you get to tell those stories. So, of course, it's not like you. I mean, our rule number one in Outriders is that a reporter should be a shadow of a story. So if you go to our social media coverage, if you go to me, you will see that rarely, very rarely, you see our faces. You will see, that we are in front of cameras or so or so.
Mm-hmm.
So that lessons of how do you still focus on the story. And yes, of course, we can talk, a lot about different and so on and so on. But Mark, that I am a little bit uncomfortable in the public sharing this, knowing that this may be taken. I am absolutely against heroic journalism. And I
Right.
do know that, and I do think that there are meaningful ways of doing this. It's really by, just saying that you're somewhere here and so on and so on. So yeah, I mean, you can save me by asking the questions, because you also know that I like to detour to many different things. So
well, I mean, I appreciate that, Jakub, and I know you feel uncomfortable putting yourself in front of, like you said, the camera, or just in front of the story that Outriders is trying to tell. So once more, I appreciate that you're doing this. But I do want to press one personal detail, if you don't mind me asking. I mean,
we'll see.
Thanks. But last time we talked, you told me something that I've been really thinking about a lot. You said something. I asked you like why would you do this, right? Like, I mean, why putting yourself on the line? I mean, you've got your family back home in Warsaw, your two little girls, and you actually told me that's the reason why, that you can't, face your children and not do this, because I mean, if I remember correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you explained to me something about something that perhaps people in Eastern Europe feel much more strongly and know much more deeply than perhaps we do in like me in the Netherlands or anywhere else in the world, which is like the kind of danger that Russia represents. Like this wouldn't stop in Ukraine, and that, I mean, that really hit home to me, that you do this because of your family, not because of your family you wouldn't do this. Is that correct? Am I phrasing it correctly?
You are phrasing this correctly. For me personally, this is like my way of looking at it. I think every individual journalist has their own answer for it. There is a lot of reporters who are here who do not have families, who do not have even partners currently. As they say, war correspondents, which I am not, drunk, divorced. And there's one more D, which I never remember.
Depressed? I don't know.
Probably something like this. It is, first of all, this is my job. Simple. I don't want to over heroify it, and downplay it. Simple. This is why Outriders was established. Of course, our job is also we carry a certain mission into it, but that mission, especially I think in dangerous situation, cannot turn you into someone who is simply crazy or endangering others people's life. But this is simple. This is a job. And if it's a job, you have to make sure that, first of all, you are capable and fit to do it. And especially working in such conditions, you have to be somewhat physically fit. I really wouldn't downplay it. If your main exercise is a Friday beer session, and that's it, what you have. I mean, at least you Dutch people bike all the time, but
We should.
but this is the first thing. Second, I feel, can you communicate? Can you, I don't know, do you understand the topic? What other things do you need? I mean, Ukraine is a big country, and you can work in different parts of it. You can work in a fairly safe spaces and still be able to do great stories. You can work in very dangerous parts. You can be even a combat journalist. My good friend Marcin always tries to make a division between war correspondents and combat reporters, because combat reporters are those who just really are able to follow the army, and there is very few of them. Just to underline it, some people try to call me a war correspondent just because of the fact that I have been here for so long. I do neglect to be called like this out of respect for actual war reporters who are much closer to the real danger and are still able to produce stories. So going back to your question, yes, exactly. I mean, I do feel, having said this, I do feel able to still produce stories, to still talk to people, to still manage the whole situation. And I think, for as long as I'm able to do it, of course, trying to find this, as Ukrainians say, war-life balance.
Yeah.
For me, it is more work-life balance. And I've had this very personal moment after a couple of days of war, when I saw a good friend of mine who was taking his daughter and wife to Polish-Ukrainian border. And I thought to myself that if Ukraine falls, I will be in a couple of years, this might be me on the Polish-German border with my family. So it's not like after this, I decided to join the army, Ukrainian army, but I decided, for me, it was really, I just became like instantly sober. It was a lot of emotions on the first days, a lot of thinking, a lot of chaos and so on. So no, I'm staying. For as long as I'm able to do the job, I'll find my way of doing this, and do this the best we can, because of what for what we believed when we were creating Outriders. And it was for exactly such stories. And I feel very privileged that I get to work here with two colleagues who have much more experience, with whom we were already working. It's not the whole team, but specifically who had huge experience being in such situations. And I have already worked with them in the past many times. So it has also been a great lesson, and a great lesson in basically being a journalist, not only on this war-related aspect, but I would say most importantly on the ethical aspect of all of this. And yeah, I mean, if you think about it, Poland has taken over 2 million. I'm sorry, I do not. Maybe it's something between 2 or 2.5 million right now in Poland refugees.
Yeah.
For the country of 38 million, currently, we've already probably 500,000 or 1 million Ukrainians who arrived economically before. Almost 20th or 18th person is Ukrainian in the country. So I am amazed by how the Polish society has reacted, and that we were able to accommodate. And that story has missed me, and I greatly, frankly, miss it, because I simply was unable to cover it. I just heard it from family, friends, that basically, and watched some social media, and being focused on what is happening here. So yeah, I think, and you will see it politically in European Union, that there have been countries, mostly for Central Eastern Europe, who have been taking, who have been trying to pursue other European Union countries to take a much harsher stand towards Russia before the invasion in Ukraine began. And frankly speaking, no one listened. And right now we are in this "we told you so" moment, which is, and we see, and I think everybody who's watching this video can see how your respectful governments are changing, how is their action changing, with two biggest European Union countries being Germany and France, that they found themselves in a very fucked up politically situations by the way how they handled it, and how they handled how their policy have been for basically past 20 years. So, and just to finalize this thought, I also think that this probably will be one of the most important stories I will get to cover in my professional career, and I hope it's going to be one of the most important stories, because I don't know what is next in scale. You know, maybe other stories will come my way and so on, but I would. This is simply for Poland, for my audience. This is #1 story since the World War II, basically.
Let's circle back to Outriders as a network, and maybe you can tell a little bit about what it does, and specifically what you're building with Outriders in Ukraine at the moment. I mean, if memory serves me well, you started this in 2017. Quite early on, there was a series of dispatches from Ukraine that Outriders was reporting on. And first you got into the country in Ukraine, of course, like you said, in February, to cover what was happening, but now you're expanding your base of operations, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us a little bit about Outriders as a network, and how it's grown and its relation to Ukraine?
So we created Outriders based out of 3 reasons. The first one was that, you know, we saw that mainstream media are doing less and less so-called global coverage. And that is for many reasons. You know, they were saying economical reasons. Of course, it's much easier to do gossips than send a bunch of reporters to, not even, I would say, war zone, but basically to any other country, or not to mention different continent, you know, costs and what you get, 1 or 2 stories, you know. So that was the first thing. You know, we thought that this is a niche. Why we thought this is a niche? Because we started to understand that because of technology, because of the globalization combined with technology, we see events which do not happen physically in your country, but they can influence and, you know, change the outcome of elections. They can change the public discourse. We can see this right now. Russia invaded Ukraine, and countries in Europe, countries in many countries around the world are changing their policies, and it's basically reshaping their internal politics. So now let's say I'm a Dutch editor, and you look and you're like, oh shit, this is an important issue. Who do I get? Who here is an expert, you know, on Ukraine, Russia? And you're like, oh no, I only have my political reporters who cover Dutch Parliament, you know. So that is something what we saw from designing a startup as something where we can find our place, as something which is very important for the audience to have this perspective. And our assumption was that there is simply going to be more and more stories like this, because whatever our politicians say, whatever, you know, we have those globalization, anti-globalization movements. So I don't want to tap into this discourse. I would just want to say that because of technology and our information ecosystem, that it's so easy to see images from different countries, our actions are much faster. 100 years ago, people in New Zealand probably would learn after 2 weeks that there is some invasion. That would be a much larger delay, and as such, the reaction would be, you know, it would be less visual than it is right now. You know, you can see how, because for example, Ukraine has a great access to internet, a very cheap access to internet, a very good mobile connection, fiber connection in many cities. That's one of the reasons why this war is so well documented.
Right.
Why open source community, you know, a Dutch-based Bellingcat, you know, gets so many sources just by following social media and so on, because people are able not only to take the images, but also upload them quickly, large videos and so on and so on. But going back to Outriders. And the final reason was that we really wanted to try something new, something which would not only do those stories, but would at the same time experiment with the form. And the form is really important to us. Maybe it comes from our, let's say, personal, a little bit geekiness in terms of just, you know, we just like to give to our audience something which is very nice done. So it's not only about serving them food, it's also about sometimes those little details around it. So there is, and we like to simply do it. And we didn't find a place like this in Poland for us to do. So we decided to create one. And currently what we do is that, first of all, we produce a regular magazine sent via email, highly illustrated, which has 8 stories every week.
Mhm.
Second thing, which hopefully, and it's already becoming a very important, it was supposed to be important, although we never anticipated it's going to grow so quickly, is the podcast,
Mm.
which was started on the 4th or 5th day of war. Initially, it was be launching end of April, I think. The third thing is that we produce, so those are 2 our regular things. That's our, let's say, major strategy shift last year, that we've had to introduce more regular stuff for our audience, because we have this a very irregular unit which produces in-depth multimedia interactive stories, which takes time, burn money, and produce great stories and so on. But we have been fighting for past 5 years to produce it more regularly. It's simply, for a little organization, it's very hard to structure it this way, at least for us. And then we have our festival, which happens end of June, which brings different journalists, storytellers, influencers, with the same object as the whole organization, is to explain the world. But on the festival, we try to combine not only a journalistic perspective, we invite travelers, we invite thinkers, activists, social media people, and so on. Like, we think that these days, like a Mark, who, Mark Smith, they get their information from news, but they also get it from brands. They get it from streaming services by watching documentaries. And we see that on many platforms, whether it's Netflix, HBO, and so on, there is more and more demand for documentaries. And I think that's one of the things which is not noticed by media industry.
Mm.
That there is actually, and why people watch it, because those are great movies. Someone actually made great movies which do not look like a typical 80s documentary done in an old American school. Those are just storytelling masterpieces, and at the same time, just good information sources. And I observed this because, for me, this is a signal that there is this growing demand for quality information, provided that it's done in a well way. I remember when we were starting, some news editors in Poland were telling me no one in Poland is interested in global news.
Mm.
I was like, it's either this, and maybe you're right, or your stories simply suck. So, I mean, that was my thinking. It's
Yeah.
we cannot just say that spaghetti is bad just because you had one. Maybe it was a really bad spaghetti, and you were like, oh my God, I'll never have this anymore. So, so this is basically where we are, I think. And on top of this, we also have this membership club, which we try to grow.
Right.
So those are basically our core activities. Now, especially the special stories department, I would say, is what we currently do in Ukraine, which is the special coverage. It's, first of all, it's super important for our audience. Second of all, as you said, we have been always covering in Ukraine. For a year and a half after we started, it was dispatches.
Mhm.
Later on, we for 3 years, we were doing just updates on a special dedicated Facebook group, which became very popular, and so on. Right now, we are winding it off because of the algorithm and so on. So we started this Facebook group because this was a moment when Facebook was pushing groups and giving them more reach. Whereas right now, it's the organic growth is there great, and we are also, as I said, just cleaning our house in terms of structuring what we do. And because we have been, if there is one downside of what we do, is that we play around so much with the form, is that people sometimes have hard idea to explain what we do.
Mm.
So this is why we said that we have to, last summer, I started to think that, okay, we have one regular thing, we need another regular thing in different form, but in a form which will be understandable by people. And this is how the idea of a podcast was born. It wasn't exactly that, hey, let's do a podcast because everybody else is doing. It was more like a process. Plus, the community was saying, number one thing requested by our community was do the podcast. And that was ongoing for past 3 years. And we were like, we'll see. We wanted to wait over the initial hype, but also let others build this market for us. So because it's a different situation than with the newsletter magazine we have. It's still unconquered space by other media in Poland. So it was very easy for us to gain #1 place there. With podcast, we were entering a market where we knew that there is going to be, we will have to, how do you do it, you know?
Fight for a place for yourself. I mean, it's a crowded
exactly.
market for sure. Yeah.
Like, hey, we are coming here your way. Please step aside, you know? So it's a different, it demanded a different thinking. We have, I've been listening to podcasts for 3 months, both with which we are competing, both which I find interesting, trying to build and I built a custom model of 40 different items, which I believe makes a podcast. And just to trying to understand what others are doing and how they are addressing and finding our different niches here. So from Ukraine, we currently produce parts of the podcast. Initially, I think the first 12 or 13 episodes were solely dedicated to Ukraine. For a weekly podcast, we produced 13 episodes in 3.5 weeks, just because, you know, it was going like this. There was a moment when this podcast was top 4 on Spotify in Poland in the first days. It was, you know, such a huge demand and so on, and we were producing so many episodes. Right now, I think it's top 30 or something like this. So it's still, you know, actually doing quite well, but we are transitioning into what it's supposed to be, which is a weekly production, because the first episodes were shorter and now they are around an hour. So it's a different kind of production. The second thing we do is we produce in-depth stories. So we have 2 reporters who are solely focused on producing maybe 1 or 2 stories per month. And those are usually people who are in the more endangered areas. And the third of all, which is we are trying to, and I think this will finally launch this week, is that we have built this network of local reporters here in Ukraine in 7 different cities. I'm just wrapping today final confirmations of them and doing like the final training sessions. Because we wanted to not only focus on showing the ruins. I think it's very important to show the tragedy and to highlight it, but different cities have different approach to it. And we have seen, and our audience was really happy when I wasn't afraid to record 1 episode in a coffee place in Kyiv. They were like, it was like a little mindfuck even for them, you know, because they expected me to be in the vest, helmet, you know, and so on. But I also didn't want to be one of those reporters who would over dramatize the situation for, let's say, a little, you know. I thought, listen, I'm having a coffee. I'm very happy we found this place. You know, right now there is plenty of coffee shops open, plenty of restaurants in Kyiv. But 3 weeks ago, the situation was absolutely different. My colleague Marcin, when he was going, one time he went out to bring us coffee home. He told me that people were stopping on the street, asking, "Where did you get that coffee?" And driving there immediately, biking immediately. So and I said, okay, since we found this one place, I mean, I'm going to record it because I think this is actually, it's also, I personally like those little things, which when I know that there is a certain view established of reality, and the further you are from Ukraine, you know, you think like the whole country is just bombed all the time. You know, you wake up and you're like, Kyiv was bombed again, 3 bombs. And, you know, you think like, oh my God, the whole Amsterdam is destroyed, you know? You know, like if you were just do it like this. No, it's probably a couple buildings, you know? And probably in a different part of Amsterdam, you would be unable to hear what happened in a different part, you know? So just to give this perspective, I have to say it took me a lot of time to explain this to my mother. But just to, I think it's very important to also explain those elements to the audience, so they are able to process it better.
Jakub, I just want to, sorry for interrupting, but this element, like you said, you work also with local reporters, and you give trainings. I mean, that's a very important part of Outriders to begin with, right? You run a lab, you provide training, mentoring. and you work with a network of reporters all across Europe. I think mainly Eastern Europe, but all across Europe, and perhaps even the world now. And on the other hand, from the outside, from my privileged, faraway perspective, you're still sort of a relatively small organization. So, but it's amazing to see how you're like acting like you're a global network, and you're pulling it off, and you're producing these amazing stories and building these local networks, empowering local storytelling, different kinds of stories than you perhaps otherwise would hear. Where does this educational perspective come from? I mean, I know it's important to you, but how did you add that to the Outriders portfolio, if I may ask? And
it's because I have, even though I have graduated journalism, but you wouldn't be proud, Mark, because it took me 11 years.
Oh, that's perfect.
I have, before Outriders, I have been very much active in a civic engagement sector. So doing a lot of open data with civic tech. So my arrival into journalism or into media industry has come only from, I have come here only for impact, not for personal gain. Just feeling, that this is what the society needs and so on. Being personally, I started also as a travel blogger. When I was like 20 and started to travel, me and my wife, which is now co-founder of Outriders also, we've had a travel blog, which at some point became quite popular in Poland. And based out of this travel blog, we've created a travel festival. And combining that experience, which I've had in a previous NGO, which I was co-leading for 7 years, with this need. So from that, we had this need to really impact and create something meaningful for the audience. On the other hand, we had this little global approach, and we've had the existing community of the festival, which is now rebranded into Outriders Festival. So some certain pieces were basically in place. We just took it into what I will tell you a secret, because on one other reason why we started Outriders is because we really wanted to work together, me and my wife, co-founder. But it's really basically impossible to bring your spouse or a partner into existing company, because it destroys the fabric. Like if you let's say, Mark, you've established organization, you have 10 people, and then suddenly you're like, okay, here is your new co-CEO, actually my partner. The whole fabric of the organization is like awkward.
Yeah.
It's easier to start an organization together, so because then no one questions it. So that was the secret reason, also number 4, why we wanted simply to do it. And we had an idea. So looking at, first of all, Polish media ecosystem, and if you think about journalism as a community, so let's put it this way. First of all, what makes a community? So community has, first of all, leaders. So people with certain authority, which are recognized by other community members, that they, let's say, hold a certain value within this community. Now, as the community grows, it may develop institutions. And then there are certain institutions which make it much stronger even than initial leaders, which is, and you have institutions. And the third thing which makes community is education, which for, let's say, a small beer community could be understood that they value more craft than just regular Heineken, and so on. So you have those 3 elements. And what was going on in Poland, that our journalistic institutions were taken over by the pro-government fuckers. So we've had very little, there were some clubs or so, but they've had no meaningful power. The last remaining, I think, things which somewhat institutionalized the journalism in Poland are some awards, because awards are also element which institutionalizes, it gives certain standards. Then you have leaders. So if the institutions fail, it goes to people. The problem here, thus, in a highly polarized society, you have 2 sets of leaders. So frankly speaking, it doesn't work because one group of conservative propagandists. I'm not going to call them journalists. They have their leaders who tell them good job, and the others are like, no, this is just bullshit propaganda, So this is the thing. And the last thing is education. And in journalism work, there were always two ways of schooling. One was by a proper university education, which, frankly speaking, at least in Poland, the so-called journalism studies are highly criticized by journalists because they not good quality. You're more focused on the form and rather than like a topic or so. So, but that's one thing. Let's put it this way. And the second thing is within education is informal education, which historically has been done by a senior reporter passing knowledge to junior reporter.
Right.
The problem is, so having said all of this, I was like, shit, we are in trouble in journalism in Poland. Because frankly speaking, none of those fields is actually working very well. With the senior and junior reporters, which should be the last field of defense, the problem is that media are currently so busy and are for maybe forever, but let's say they've had better financial moments. And they've, that because of the way they structured their money expenditures, in past 15 years, we've created a lot of freelancers. And I think that the amount of freelancers we have on the market is something which is slowly killing journalism. Because freelancers first want to pay their bills. Simple. So if you have a freelancer who works for Outriders, who works for a crowd reporter in Germany, who works for someone else, and each of those media organizations tries to do something different. They have their own style. It's very hard to build it. I think journalism should done be by teams.
Right.
So my long answer going short, why this education? I simply think I don't like this commercial competition between media. This secrecy, this unwillingness to share. This is why I'm a huge fan of this small but very active global community, like in Perugia, like in some other events, like, we get a beer and we discuss things. I am absolutely open about everything too. Nothing has ever happened to me because I just helped someone. I believe in a competition understood that today you do better, next day I do better because I learned from you. Of course, there are certain things which you always try to keep secret when you work on a project and so on. But after, let's say, you roll out the project, I mean, go to a marketing event, go to a business event, IT event. You have CEOs there who go and they give presentations exactly about everything they've done, the whole process, and so on. Go to, I don't know, very few journalism professionals does that, especially from bigger legacy mainstream media,
Yeah.
So we thought this is super important that we share our knowledge because at the end of the day, we provide a public service, even though we are, whether we are established as an NGO or a for-profit company, we are actually a non-profit company, a combination of both. So more like a social entrepreneurship. Our duty is to give it back. So our people who give us money, they also know that they're not only investing in us, but we open source willingly what we learn.
So in Ukraine right now, you're working a lot with Ukrainian journalists, sort of like trying to sort of extend the Outriders network in Ukraine to facilitate their reporting. Is that the correct way for me to understand this?
Yes. So we're taking like an updated approach of what we have done in Syria, where we had just one reporter, and we produced for a couple months Rojava Diary, which was done through WhatsApp. And actually, that story was last year or 2 years, was recently nominated by the European Press Prize. Not this year; it was another thing, but it was by the way how we worked, so if there was a local reporter on the ground who was sending all the stuff via WhatsApp, audio, video, photos, and on top of this, we were producing 2 or 3 episodes of podcast, short one. But why it was nominated? It was because of the process of how we basically cooperated.
Yeah.
And this is the other thing, which I think is also for the media industry to understand, like there is this over-heroization of a Dutch journalist on the ground, of a Polish journalist on the ground towards your audience. You know, I've had a journalist call me yesterday or 2 days ago, and he's writing like a piece about reporters who are on the ground, and he asks about our team and so on. I said, okay, so there is this guy from Poland, this guy from Poland, you know, plus we have those like 6 people from Ukraine. Yeah, I'm not interested in them. And I was like, what the fuck? You know, because he was only writing about Polish journalists on the ground. So, and this is a huge problem, because it shows me, I mean, at the end of the day, it's really about the audience. Either the audience gets quality information or not. And frankly speaking, especially for editors, I think they really shouldn't care how they do it. I mean, if it's done by a Polish Dutch journalist, fine. But if it's done by a combination of people who are on the ground, who know better context and so on, fine. It's really, so this is, I think it's also because, you know, many journalists who work especially in such places are freelancers. They have to make their name. It's because they are not in teams. You know, there is 1-2 people that the freelancers form groups and so on. So I am personally not a huge fan of freelance journalism as a field. I'm a good friend with many freelance reporters who I understand this market has been created this way, but I do not think it's serving any good both media organizations, both publishers, you know, and simply those freelance reporters who, it's different thing to go to Netherlands and, you know, make a story in a comfortable environment because, you know, the country is safe, you know, everything works and so on. So your main risk is that you will be hit by a bike. But here, where you need so much logistic provided, I've recently seen a tweet, you know, like a freelance reporter self-financing the trip to a war zone makes $35,000. A columnist writing opinions make 300,000.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want to get into this because this is like, I can philosophize like this and so on and so on. But I just wanted to highlight certain things which are, I think, core behind our thinking and Outriders. And maybe this also gives certain insight. I am, first of all, really happy that we get to send money to Ukrainian journalists because they need it more than we do. We have built the whole operation by bringing everything on our own from Poland. We have not touched any aid supported my Polish team aimed at Ukrainian journalists. And we've provided a lot of about our Ukrainian reporters, yes. And that has been really important to us because I have seen sometimes reporters here who just took a plane, they came here and they're like, where do I get my vest? And I'm like, what the fuck?
Right.
It costs a lot of money. I mean, this is like, what else do you need? Maybe immediately an award, you know, handed to you just by the fact that you landed. I mean, this is not like a, how do they call it? In Spain, they have this ritual when a bull goes on the street and you have to clap its ass or something like this and then run away. I mean, this is not something like this. It's not like you come to Kyiv, you clap it, and then you go back home, you know, ready to receive awards. I'm sorry if I'm criticizing it like this. But on the other hand, I'm just trying to, you know, I think this is really a huge lesson for publishers and editors. You know, the value of teams, which especially is visible in such moments. Yeah. When you have complex stories and one person is unable here. Come on, here we need a military expert, you know, people who are good with working with people who have experience in security and, you know, and working in dangerous stuff, you know, understanding the context, you know, animations. You could build just a startup to cover this, you know, and it would require 20, 30 people. And maybe you would then get a hold of it, but there's so much material. Look at what's open source journalism community doing. You know, this for them, it's like they're super busy, let's put it this way, you know, but they have done tremendous work in fastly verifying a lot of things. I think that, you know, for the open source community, this is a groundbreaking moment. And I think they will leave the phase of being just located in startups and more media organizations will develop their own units of it, because this can be applied to everything rather than just combat zones or war zones and so on, because you can use the techniques to verify whatever politician video you have or so, and it's also usually highly shareable and very impactful at the same time.
If I may ask, Jakub, your experience until now working with Ukrainian colleagues. I mean, I had the chance and the privilege to interview some Ukrainian media professionals at Gwara Media working out of Kharkiv recently. And they also told the story about, that there's two types of foreign journalists in Ukraine right now. The people who are, well prepared, they bring their own vest, they know what's going on, they're respectful and all that kind of stuff. And then the other group, they said they called them the passengers. I thought that was a really interesting metaphor. But one thing they told me that really hit home to me, and I wonder if that's your experience too, or if that resonates with your experience working with your Ukrainian colleagues during all of this. They said they got a bit frustrated with Western media, or with foreign media in general, but Western media in particular, in that they were covering the invasion and the war always with this geopolitical angle. So they would talk about NATO or about the EU or about Russia, and I sensed this sort of frustration of, yeah, but this is happening to us. I mean, just the story of the people here, that's the story that needs to be told. And that I mean, I sense some frustration there, and like what you just told me about that, the story of this war is also the story of people finally being able to enjoy a cup of coffee somewhere together, and that kind of story might get lost in the haste of all these foreign media covering the big, conflict. Is that something that resonates with you and the Outriders approach as well?
So this is, first of all, so there's a couple angles here. So first of all, every medium has its audience. So I'm not somewhat surprised that the stories will be different for the Dutch audience and for the Polish people. It's different historical context, different understanding, different pre-existing stereotypes and knowledge about Ukraine, and so on and so on. That, for example, Dutch Prime Minister, is very harsh on the current Polish government for the way it's handling and so on. So you have different pre-existing knowledge, about what Poland is or so. Just if you were to cover Poland. So I think establishing this baseline is very important. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I do, listen, it's not only that they are journalists here, but they are also Ukrainians. So it's a very tough moment personally. It's a tough moment morally. I know some journalists who are no longer journalists because they serve. So this is something what I cannot comprehend in a way, because I'm still a foreigner. Or not Ukrainian. I'm Polish, very close to Ukraine, a lot of common history in past centuries and so on and so on. But it's still, I don't have this angle, which is like that this is my country. They have it. They've had it for past 8 years. The whole country knew that there is going to be an end game to what has been started in 2014, and that end game has arrived, and it's a huge invasion, and we are now discovering a lot of things. So I think, you could see some stories which you could say that they have been over westernized or so. But I would say that the general, I simply understand that what you said. I don't know if it's a frustration or so. It's just, I would add to this little, feeling that it's simply their country.
Yeah.
It's not, it's, that's it. And when they say this, they may be speaking, they come from this mixed role, that they not only assess the story as a journalist, but they also assess the story as a case. I completely understand it. And I think I completely support it. Because if you see, there's so many fascinating things which are happening, I would say, from the information level. I think one of the things which should be addressed is the language of President Zelensky. He is he reshaped the diplomatic language. He basically is not a diplomat. he shoots in between eyes, as we say, and I can imagine that, and that's also a combination that, there have been a lot, the creative sector in Ukraine was growing, they have this very good IT sector. They are very good at communication and so on and so on. So you can see this, but I think this, for example, is something what I think a lot of Western politicians find very uncomfortable, because they are just used to condemn things and not someone just calling them out so publicly, and so on and so on. So I'm saying this more that to analyze it from like even political sciences, journalistic, how does it affect media ecosystem? Because, what he says is then quoted, then makes a reaction and so on and so on. So there's a lot of things which are happening, which we simply don't have time to cover, or it's yet too soon to actually write something more to see the exact impact of it. But I detoured from the initial question, which was how they process. I do that. I'm sorry.
Okay. You're
Okay.
very welcome to.
So yeah, I mean, I understand it. And we always tried to combine different angles. When we were working in Afghanistan, it was always with Afghani journalists. We've had 3 sessions right now in Perugia, about Belarus migration and exactly Afghanistan, and you could see a lot of our reporters with whom we worked, good friends and so on. I just think that, it's not about exactly enforcing this one view, and maybe this is what they are against, which is like this, that there is a one culture or something like this. It's about this coexistence of many cultures, and I think this is the way we're trying to approach it. So this is why it's so important right now for us to also have a lot of local reporters, because they tell us exactly what's really important. I will not say that I'm an expert on so many things which are happening here. So we need this local knowledge, local context. We need someone to tell us, this is the best kebab in this town, and this is why, and this is the worst. This is the local knowledge is really important in this. So this is why basically we wanted to work with them, because I think it's just I think it simply enriches our stories and provides more diversity into it. And because we have this team approach to this, no one is like, I don't know, feels bad because of this and so on and so on. It's really important to have this. And it's also our way of somewhat supporting them, because we are able to give them some honoraria, at least for doing this job.
It's really striking to me, Jakub, that whenever we talk and whenever I follow Outriders and the work that you do, and also now in Ukraine and this network that you're setting up and the support that you're bringing, the teaching that you're doing, this constant emphasis on, team. There's I'm sorry if this is a detour a little bit, but I was struck by this when I was preparing for our conversation today. I saw this initiative that you started, or that Outriders started, on love speech.
Yeah.
Which seems to be fit. But I mean, I would love for you to tell a little bit more about it, because I mean, generally we associate journalism, and especially journalism about things like you said, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine. This is hard-hitting journalism. This is, and you're critical and all that kind of stuff, and you're tough, and that's very important. But then you embrace this very social, collaborative, team-focused approach to everything you do, which is quite remarkable. And then this love speech initiative, sort of, which I interpret as sort of encouraging and empowering people to be more respectful and more sort of in the way they communicate with each other, and building bridges, and rather than, especially on social media. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? I think it's beautiful, but.
Okay, I didn't know that you're going to drag this out, but
yeah, I'm sorry, I should have told you, but I was just
that's fine.
Really inspired by it. Sorry.
So it was the idea came to my mind a day after Mayor of Gdańsk, Paweł Adamowicz, was murdered on the stage in Gdańsk a couple of years ago. One of the reasons why this there was a lot of hate speech around him. And so I was thinking about it. And for years, I have been personally highly doubtful of the impact all those anti-hate speech campaigns that they are actually enforcing, in my opinion, hate speech. I
Mm.
have seen zero impact. I have seen just celebrities, getting more promoted because of this. And if you go back to different theories of change, one of the theories which always, and I'm personally always fascinated just reading about change in different forms it comes, and trying to understand what are the processes behind it. So one of the simple reasons is that when you have something really radical here and you want to push the society here, you have to introduce something which is here.
Mm.
So I thought, okay, if there is hate speech, it cannot be a respect speech. It has to be love speech, So this is like, we just pushed it to the other spectrum, and decided to make something which is radical love, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So everyone knows that it's also a little bit of a humor behind it. It's like absurd. Absurd is a very good way also of achieving change, and satire in the same way, because you take something out of its context, and satire journalism is very popular these days. But absurd also as a figure of speech
Mm.
is a way of sometimes um, fighting certain things. So after this, we just wanted to make this visual. So we prepared a set of different GIFs, which we then uploaded to Giphy, and
Mm.
we've allowed people to use it if you go to Giphy and you look for Mowa Miłości in Polish, love speech, you can just use it. So it was like enter love zone instead of or like, because there was like no hate or no hate zone.
Yeah.
We said, fuck it, let's make enter love zone. uh, because it's also, at the end of the day, it's about being more constructive. I think when you go anti, it's important to highlight certain bad things. But the other thing is, I remember like 90s or beginning of 2000s. I don't know if you have it in Netherlands, but like we were just buying a lot of illegal DVDs, just to get movies and so on and so on. Everyone was like, oh, Polish people, they just steal movies.
Mm.
But then streaming services came and everybody pays for it. So it's not exactly that. It's more about finding, it's about giving people a tool so they would behave the way you want. And it's usually, if you find a tool. So we thought, I don't think people really want to do hate speech. I think it's more maybe because they don't. Why do we assume that they know what to do? Maybe this is a problem. Why do we assume that they have tools
Mm.
to do it? Like, you know, uh, maybe we shouldn't assume this, and that's basically how it started. And then it became super popular. I don't know how many millions right now of views those gifts have and so on. But frankly speaking, that's the whole idea. We were producing those gifts for a couple months. Now it lives on its own. But it was also for our ways to signal to our community that we can talk about really problematic topics, highly polarizing, LGBTQ plus issues. Fine. But we can use love speech for it. We don't have to immediately go into those two pre-existing narratives, which, are just meaningless in terms of like, why don't we just sit down and talk? So that was basically like this. And maybe it had something to do with our pre-existing, civic engagement activities, thinking just about it. We were, frankly speaking, we were absolutely surprised by how viral it became.
Mm.
It was supposed to be like a little bonus, an offsite project. And I think Zetland incorporated and done this campaign in Denmark.
Yep.
At least they quote us as an inspiration source. I'm not sure about the results. Plus, I don't. Danish is the language in Denmark.
Yeah, yeah.
Danish? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't speak Danish, but I just Google Translate the initial article and so on and so on. So, yeah, I think the simplicity of this action is what makes it so easy to cover. But just so we understand the mechanism behind it, first,
Yeah.
introduce a radical element to counter the other radical. In our case, it was radically positive. Second thing, go for absurd. And, third of all, is was thinking, let's try to give people some tool. Let's not assume that they know um, how to do all of this.
Yeah.
Especially that when we talk in a visual, it was primarily used on Instagram stories, so let's introduce this, and that's it.
No, thanks. Yeah, sorry for putting you on the spot there, but I was just inspired by it, and it really speaks to the overall attitude that I always find with you and with Outriders of it's hard-hitting journalism, but then it's collaborative, it's educational, it's very much about, and then there's this sort of element of joy of being creative and just creating something and making something beautiful that I think is really amazing. So Jakub, in conclusion, because I don't want to hog all your time, and I really appreciate you taking the time in Kyiv to sit down. Maybe you can say a little bit about what's going to happen, what do you see happening with Outriders in the weeks ahead, what you're planning to do, and also for people who are watching this or listening to this later on. I mean, many people around the world probably feel like powerless. They want to do something, maybe how they can help you, or how you would advise people to help Ukraine in this context, and especially, of course, Ukrainian journalism.
So as for us, we try to find a balance between this coverage of the situation in Ukraine, between our activities. I do hope that our festival end of June will happen. Everything is scheduled. So, 25th, 26th of June, I invite you to come to Warsaw and then take a half an hour train to a little city outside of it, where you will enjoy. We will actually have a lot of international guests this year coming in from the really different countries.
Great.
Plus, of course, some special things. I have to say, we will keep producing the magazine. We will keep growing the podcast. And this is what I can frankly tell you, because it's been really hard to focus on daily normal activities. And I think it will still remain like this for some time, for as long as this war continues. And right now, switching on one hand more to the southern eastern part of Ukraine, but I think it's going to be even harder than what we've seen up until now. So we are basically preparing to cover different angles of how the Ukrainian society is fighting and how it's rebuilding, how it's managing during this. And this is what we're trying to show. When it comes to support, I would say if it comes to our staff, just share it. If it comes to money, please support the different Ukrainian media. You will find them. Just type support to Ukrainian media. You will find different organizations. You can choose the one which is doing stuff which you like. And I think this is basically the way to do it. Or if you are unable to, which is fine, of course, just share their stuff, or find an angle to do it. So that's how I would put it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure to see you, and so much respect for the work that you and your fellow Outriders are doing.
Thank you.
And I hope we can reconnect down the road. And
hope so too.
And then follow up and see each other, whether it's in Ukraine or in Warsaw or somewhere else in a beautiful place to talk about journalism.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure, Mark. I do hope that I'm going to see you very soon